This technique is going to show you two different styles of cutting out portraits and a time lapse of how these are put back together. But the first one is focused on the spacing in between, and then I'm going to stack my portraits on top of each other to incorporate both into the same composition. As I'm cutting out these triangles, I'm really thinking about compositional rules. So I was following a leading line, all pointing towards my focal point. What I'm doing now though here on this second piece of paper is cutting out spacing for an additional layer. So I'm layering my pictures on top of each other, and then I wanted to also incorporate some sort of design of these shapes on top too. And then I'm going in with the pieces that I cut out and seeing if there's a creative way I can layer those on top of each other. So think about how you want to incorporate the portraits and how you can cut them out, piece them together. In this one, or in this time lapse, I'm working on piecing together different triangles and putting together the entire portrait. And that way I can kind of scatter these out, spread them out, make it look like the portrait's kind of pulling or separating apart. As you're working with the X-Acto, make sure that you do have the backing behind or underneath it, so you're not cutting into the table, and always try your best to cut away from yourself. But with these triangles, I'm thinking about the spacing, the placement, the direction of them, how I'm able to bring more attention towards my focal point, and think about movement too. And it helps if you stop and hold that X-Acto blade in one spot so that you can then just move the ruler and keep things lined up. It's probably the easiest way to go about it, so you know where to start and stop with what you're cutting. But I'm taking my time to line those up correctly. I don't want to move a facial feature or get something out of proportion too much until I get maybe to the outside of the face. But again, I'm trying to cut some larger sections in the face here so that I'm not losing too much detail. If you do a lot of small triangles, just make sure the spacing is pretty close together so that you're not losing that proportion and distance between the facial features. So now I'm getting more and more cut out and put back together. Think about what the background's going to be. What are you putting these images back together on? So I have cardboard here, which is an interesting additional layer that you can do even more with. So after this video, I go back, I rip some of the pieces apart. You can get the texture with it. When I start adding a little bit of color into this, I'm using pastels, and when you use pastels on cardboard, it creates an interesting texture. So that's something that you could play around with as well. Also consider maybe adding shadows or painting the background first. That way you don't have to try to go in between the spaces like I do on a future video here. So think about what that background is going to be. Are you going to use a different technique first that you can incorporate maybe another picture or pops of color, text? How are you going to put that together? Remember to just be creative and think about how it's going to all be cohesive and how you can follow compositional rules as well. But I'm going to kind of jump around so you can see it start to come together a little bit more. As I get towards the outside, I'm cutting smaller triangles, and I'm starting to spread them further apart, or I'm sorry, closer together with the smaller triangles here on the outside, and kind of have them curve outwards to create that movement from the left to the right of the composition, and draw that eye in and point towards the focal point or the main part of the portrait. And remember too to try to follow the rule of thirds, so I have that portrait off to the side.